Hey guys, my name is Loveless, and this time we're here with Quirk Knife. So this time it's going to be a little bit of a trigger warning because it's a little bit much. Like so much, I was like, damn, this will cause me to have a trigger and flashbacks. Like fuck. So I was like, yeah, this one deserves a trigger. So if you have any triggers against suicide baiting, abuse, violence, homophobia, all that stuff, then be careful if you still want to get into it. But yeah, be careful out there. Let's get straight into it. Izuku blinked warily, staring down at the wooden table in which he sat. The room was loud, bright, and warm, soft music playing while everyone chattered excitedly. No, they weren't speaking. They were singing. Happy birthday, dear Uzu. Happy birthday to you. Izuku looked up with his eyebrows pinched together. It was his birthday? Is something wrong, my birthday boy? Izuku stared at his mother with wide eyes, her slim form watching him with a gentle smile. Izuku, Papa cooed from his left, and Izuku felt a smile grow on his face. You haven't even eaten your cake yet, Auntie chuckled. Does it really look that good? Katsuki chose the colors for the icing and everything. The small blonde nodded proudly. Cake! He screamed in excitement, causing the adults to burst out laughing. Izuku's eyes crinkled as he smiled as wide as he could, even if he didn't understand what was going on. He didn't need to understand because everyone was happy around him, so he was happy too. Happy first birthday, Izuku, Mama whispered, planting a soft kiss against his forehead, only to pull back with a large sneeze. Jeez, Izuku, you definitely have your father's hair. She laughed as Papa ruffled his growing black and green curls. Good, I think it's my best attribute. It was Izuku's first birthday, and he never wanted this day to end. But as his mother lifted a fork with cake seated on it towards Izuku's mouth and closed his eyes to take a big bite, the cake never came. With a confused huff on why it had gone so silent, Izuku opened his eyes, surprised as he felt the couch underneath him. Had he fallen asleep? He looked around the television room to find himself alone, the TV echoing in the quiet room. I am here. Izuku whirled around to face the show that had been left on. His eyes widened as the hero on screen. The man was speaking, but Izuku stared at the massive smile the man wore. His laugh deep when the host asked him a question. All Might, the woman raised her microphone. What keeps you smiling, even in such intense situations? The muscular hero smiled even wider as he looked into the camera. It's quite simple. Something that anyone can do. Izuku hung on to every last word, his tiny hands gripped onto his pants, leaning so forward to the television he was bound to fall at any moment. I smile because those who smile are the strongest. I will always wear a smile as I pronounce, I am here. The room around Izuku began to melt away, but he paid it no mind, instead trying to memorize every little detail about this hero. It was the first time Izuku was introduced to All Might. The couch folded in before Izuku had a chance to notice, causing everything to go black as his stomach dropped. Izuku, honey, wake up! What? Izuku muttered as his mom smiled at him from the front mirror of the car. Stay awake, silly. We're almost there. Izuku sat up straighter in the car and looked out the window, trying to make sense of where they were going. He gripped his All Might figurine tighter and looked back into the mirror. Hush, Papa snapped from the driver's seat. No point in stumbling over your words for another fucking century. Hazashi, language, please. Mama whispered in a quiet voice, almost if she was afraid. Why was she afraid? Izuku took a deep breath and focused on the movement of his tongue. Where are we going? He noticed the way Papa gripped on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. whereas Mama turned around in the passenger seat. Just a doctor for a checkup. Izuku couldn't help but frown. Is that... there's something wrong with me? Mama opened her mouth to respond, but Papa beat her to it as he hit the brakes a little too aggressively at the red light. Yes. Izuku pushed his bottom lip out and turned his eyes back to the window, remarking that they were probably in the city since the roads were busier than usual. He stayed silent the entire appointment, his mother doing most of the talking as his father stared at him with a pinched expression. It was making Izuku's stomach hurt. It could be several things, the doctor muttered, as he wrote down something on the clipboard. I understand he's 3, so I'm sure he'll be fine. Sometimes the development of speaking can be delayed. It's nothing to worry about yet. Papa clicked his tongue and crossed his arms, looking at Izuku with some sort of disgust. This was the first time Mama brought Izuku to the doctor. Here, kid. The doctor gave him a red lollipop and stood up. Come back for checkups if his speech doesn't improve or worsen. Izuku blinks and finds himself back in the same room, except with a different doctor, and only his mother at his side. Much more plump than before. It says you visited here quite often, the man said as Mama nodded. Yes, Izuku had trouble speaking ever since his first word. He's 4 now, and although it hasn't gotten worse, it hasn't gotten better either. But no matter, we're here for a Quirk assessment today. The doctor nodded. Did his Quirk come in? No, that's the thing. He shows no sign of Quirk, and all the other classmates got theirs already. I'm not too sure what to do. The doctor nodded in understanding. Yes, Quirk should present at age 4, but they are always exceptions. Let's take an x-ray to begin. All right, little guy? Izuku didn't try speaking. It usually just made people mad. He sat in silence as he shot his mother excited smile once in a while, but not once did she smile back. Maybe she was tired. She worked quite quirkless. That was the first time Izuku's dreams have been crushed. As tears filled his eyes, Izuku let his hand cover his face in embarrassment, only moving them once the room went quiet. Quirkless shit, Papa muttered as he returned back to the apartment. Izuku hadn't noticed the time, but it was already 5 o'clock when Papa came home every day. He didn't make any subtle movements. Instead, sitting completely still on the couch as the news played quietly, he gripped his toys between his hands. He listened to Papa do something in the kitchen as Izuku kept his eyes frozen on the television, even though he was unaware of what he was watching. Oi, Papa spat. No stuttering. Izuku knew he was being mocked, even at the age of 4.5. It was why he didn't respond. Answer me when I speak to you. Against his own will, a hand gripped the top of Izuku's head and forced him to turn, Papa looking down on him with a crooked grin. Let me go, Izuku whispered, averting his eyes to a random picture frame on the wall just left Papa's own eyes. That was a mistake. Izuku earned a hard slap across his face, harder than it usually was. Useless, Papa spat, as he picked the small boy up by his hair, dragging him across the room despite the obvious pain he was causing. It's your fault, Papa whispered, flames seeping past his lips dangerously close to Izuku's face. Everything is your fault, and he slammed Izuku down at an odd angle. Something in his leg audibly snapped as he hit the ground. He cried out in pain as it shot through his leg, Papa simply leaving the apartment without another room. Mama didn't come for work until 7. Walking through the door to find her son asleep on the floor, leg bent in an odd angle and his face stained with tears. It was the first time Izuku ever broke a bone, yet would be far from the last. Izuku yawned and picked up his head, finding himself seated in the back of the classroom. Kachan was standing over him with a large grin. What, too fucking good for us that you're sleeping in class, Deku? Izuku squinted slightly. No, Kachan. I didn't mean to. I fell asleep. His speaking was becoming easier, but obviously it wasn't good enough as Kachan and his friends bursted out laughing. Can't even speak normally. How useless can you get? Kachan stopped being Izuku's friend years ago, instead turning on him to rip him apart like some sort of doll, just like everyone else. Kachan... Stop. The blonde waved him off. Just shut the fuck up. God, every time you speak, I feel like I'm gonna blast my own ears off. Fucking hell. Just fucking die already. Izuku could only stare with his mouth hanging open as the classroom cleared out, leaving Izuku alone. Kachan never suggested suicide before, even after all these years. That must mean he really hates Izuku. This was the first time Izuku was ever told to end his life. Izuku walked to the classroom and ended up stepping right back into his kitchen, eyes latching onto the knife block in the sink. There was a fresh burn on Izuku's calf from Kachan, and it stung as the fabric rubbed against the wound with each step. His feet carrying him to the sink. Mom was gone for some work trip for the week, leaving Izuku alone. Well, alone with his thoughts, that is. His hand shook as he slowly drew the knife from the block, setting it down on the counter and staring at it until the sun went down, leaving him in the dark except for the moonlight gleaming from the sky through the window. Izuku slowly shrugged his blazer off and let it hit the floor, picking the knife back up and staring at it with tired eyes. He pressed the blade against his forearm and stared out the window with a blank expression, his body shuddering from the cold metal. Izuku didn't even flinch as he dragged the blade across quickly, but tears slowly fell from his eyes as he refused to look down. This was the first time Izuku harmed himself purposefully. The world around Izuku swirled as a gust of wind blew his bangs from his eyes, the air cold and thick. He looked down to the toes of his red shoes. They were balanced over the edge of a rooftop, the roads quite down below. It was his 13th birthday. The wind made the wetness on Izuku's cheek feel cold as he stared up at the moon, wiping his nose against his sleeve. Just one step. That's all he really had to do. It wasn't that difficult. Izuku shuffled forward slightly, his breathing accelerated as he didn't dare look down, legs trembling. He wanted to scream in anger as his legs wouldn't listen to him, wouldn't take that step off as he collapsed backwards onto his butt, pulling his knees to his chest tightly. This was the first time Izuku tried to take his life. This was all so stupid. All Izuku wanted to do was die, and no one would fucking miss him. It shouldn't be this hard. Oi! Izuku picked his head up, startled when a hair brushed against his shoulders. When had it gotten so long? We have to go. A boy with purple hair, his tired eyes wide and frantic as he pulled on Izuku. They were in a gray room with 2 doors on either side, one white and one black. What? The purple-haired boy grabbed his hand and began dragging him towards the black door. Come on, you can't stay here. But in this room, no one was trying to hurt him. It was quiet. But why not? Why can't I stay here? The taller boy looked down at him. Why would you want to stay here? I don't understand. We're waiting. Who's waiting? We are. Izuku screwed his eyes shut in thought as another set of hands suddenly grabbed his free hand. Come on, Izuku, let's go home. At the familiar voice, Izuku opened his eyes and looked at Inko, who was wearing a gentle smile. Your father's waiting. He's missed you so much. Yeah, because Sasashi's been working so hard lately. He wasn't home very often. I miss him too. Izuku slurred, struggling to get on his feet as his body felt far too heavy, letting his mother pull him to the white door. No! The boy grabbed Izuku's other side. We have to go! Come on! Izuku didn't understand why the stranger thought he had to go with him when his mother was right here in front of his eyes. How silly. Izuku looked at him, at his eyebrows pinched together slowly, the boy still gripping on his hand with desperation. Come on, Uzu. Hazashi waved from the white door. Why are you taking so long? Let's go. Another set of hands grabbed his left side. A man with white hair and blood stained on his cheeks. Come on, you're taking too long. But over here, we can be a family again. Hazashi smiled. And that was all Izuku needed. Because we love you, Izuku. Isn't that right, Inko? Of course, honey. Izuku smiled and began walking towards them, ripping his arms out of the hold of the other two. Each step felt painful, but as he grew closer to the door, it became far easier. He thought he was free until a set of hands grabbed one of his ankles, a girl with blonde hair crying heavy tears. "Don't!" she screamed. "We have to go!" "Go where?" Izuku asked in return, missing the way his parents scowled in his direction when he looked away. The purple-haired one grabbed his other ankle, and the man wrapped an arm around Izuku's torso, pulling tight. "I don't want to go," Izuku pointed out in a calm voice. "I don't want to go back there." Izuku didn't know where there was, but all he knew is that he didn't want to return. "Please," the blonde screamed. "You said always." "Always?" Izuku tilted his head. He looked over to his parents, catching the way that they tried to smile fast enough when he turned to them. But he saw it. He saw them baring their teeth in his direction. "Always," the purple boy cried. No, shrieked, pulling Izuku's leg until it caused him to stumble slightly, the white-haired man keeping him upright. "Don't be stupid," the man barked. "We have to go. Come on." "Always?" Izuku found himself repeating slowly, like it was foreign on his tongue. "Always," the three of them shouted back in unison. Izuku looked over to the black door, noting how it was chained shut with all sort of locks and buttons and tools. It looked too difficult to open. Impossible, in fact. "It's not impossible," a girl with pink hair roared. "Just open it. Just open the fucking door." Izuku turned slowly and began walking, reaching out for the chains despite the increasing pain on his body. His parents tried stepping forward, but the four strangers with colorful hair put themselves between him and the adults, causing the older Midoriyas to freeze. Izuku touched the first lock and gave it a tug, finding the metal scalding hot, burning through his skin, yet he didn't pull back. He pulled and pulled until the wire chain slipped to the ground. So he turned, checking over his shoulder. His parents had come closer, forcing the strangers to take a step back. Izuku hissed and ripped the next lock, and yanking on it with all his strength until it came loose, tossing it to the side and moving to the next one. It was too difficult, too much. He was running out of time. "Let me help, please." The man with messy black hair reached forward, but Izuku stopped him. "It's hot. You'll get hurt." "That's fine." Izuku looked towards the new voice, a hare with blonde hair wearing a determined expression as he reached forward, gripping the chain as the other man did the same. They didn't cry or complain, only pulling harder as Izuku joined their efforts, prying the door open as his parents came closer. The bright room was getting darker. "We have to go!" everyone shouted in unison at Izuku, but he didn't understand. He didn't understand. "You don't need to understand," the black-haired man said gently. "You just need to trust us." Trust? Trust. Izuku didn't know why, but he trusted these strangers with his life. He ripped off the last chain with everything he had. Shota blinked slowly and stared up at the unfamiliar ceiling, the sound of consistent beeping pulling him out of his unconscious state, as all the pain hits him at once, causing his form to shoot up. "Whoa, Shota!" He turned to his husband, his blonde hair tied up into a messy bun and his eyes completely bloodshot. "You shouldn't move too suddenly. You're still healing." She came in and tried to help everything she could, but your energy was pretty drained. Take it easy for once. Shota clicked his tongue and looked down at his right arm, which was completely encased in a thick cast. Then his left arm was bandaged up with a soft fabric and tape. His head was also wrapped all the way under his jaw and over his ears, like some sort of teenager that got their wisdom teeth removed, making it difficult to speak. Zashi brushed his bangs from his face with a wobbly bottom lip. Here, drink some water." Shota let the blonde raise the cup to his chapped lips and cradled his lower jaw gently, only allowing him to take slow and careful sips. Shota's eyes stayed on the crinkle between his husband's eyebrows, and looked at how pink his nose was, like he'd been crying for hours. Had he been crying for hours? Before he had a chance to ask if Hisashi was alright, the other spoke first. Sho, I called you during USJ. Shota stiffened slightly, at his eyes flickering back and forward from green eyes to his red eyes, unable to settle on one color. You didn't answer, and I thought the conversation we had, I thought you just said those things and then threw them out the window, that you just made those promises so I would stop crying. Shota was having trouble following as he watched in silence. He had never been good at comforting those around him. I got so fucking mad at you, Hisashi shouted suddenly. I thought you'd been fucking ignoring me and I blamed you. Then Ida and Yagi... Oh, Shota. I was too busy being a fucking pussy and sulking like some sort of schoolgirl that I didn't even check if everything was okay. Hisashi looked away and scrubbed some tears from his face. I'm sorry. This is my fault. Shota wanted to scream, wanted to shout at his husband for being stupid, but instead he closed his eyes and took a breath. Hisashi, he croaked quietly, don't ever say that shit again. I know, I'm such a horrible husband. Hisashi Yamada! Shota found himself barking as loud as he could muster. I mean, don't say things are your fault when it's something that you couldn't predict or control. This is not your fault, and don't even believe that shit for a second. Hisashi's eyes filled with more tears as he let a sob wreck through his thin frame, leaning down to press his forehead gently against Shota's. I thought you were gonna die. Shota pushed his head further against Hisashi's and let the tip of their nose bump together as carefully as possible. I would never die on you. I told you that. Despite not being the largest fan of affection, unless they are in their own apartment, Shota let Hisashi slide his lips against his own for a brief moment before letting their eyes shut in exhaustion, pain, and sadness. Now I gotta go. Shota pulled back, trying to sit up as the room began slanting ever so slightly and the lights grew brighter. Oh, was he about to throw up? That would be embarrassing. No, Shota. Hisashi scolded slightly. You need to rest. No, I don't. Allow me to list your injuries. Hisashi paused to clear his throat dramatically. First off, you've been unconscious for 18 hours. You had 3 hairline fractures up your left arm. Your right arm is completely snapped in 4 parts. Your nose is broken. Your jaw was cracked, and jagged pieces from your rib cage got chipped off, scratched the side of your right lung. You still have a concussion from a pretty major head trauma. That's the first thing Shuzenshi healed. And then you also chipped a tooth. Shota blinked in slight embarrassment. That's nothing, Shota. Sorry. The black-haired man looked towards the window and his stomach suddenly dropped. The kids! How are the kids? Tell me they're alright. Hisashi rubbed up and down Shota's thigh gently through the sheets. It's alright, Shota. Your kids are fine. Are any of the students injured? Hisashi pursed his lips in brief thought. Nothing too bad. Details. Fine. Well, Kirishima needed some stitches across his torso from whatever deep cut, but it was a flesh wound. We also had a few sprains, like Bakugo, both of his wrists. Shuzenshi assumed it was from overuse of his quirk. Todoroki overused his quirk as well. No broken bones. Just noses like Ashido and fingers like Yaoyorozu. There are some emotional distress, mainly from Kaminari, Mineta, Hakagure, Aoyama, and surprisingly Todoroki. But they're all fine, Shota. You did good. I didn't do shit, Shota mumbled under his breath, which earned a sharp sneeze from the blonde. No, you did good. Don't let me hear you say that again. Shota sat up a little straighter. And Hitoshi, how's Hitoshi? Hisashi smiled. It's Hitoshi now, not Shinso? Shut up, how is he? The blonde hummed. Could be better. He had a bruised spine, which Shuzenshi healed immediately, since that could cause future concerns, so that was dealt with. He woke up a few hours ago, actually, but tapped out a few minutes after that. Just from a bruised spine? Hizashi rubbed the back of his neck slowly and trailed a hand down to his face. He had a pretty severe concussion, but it wasn't exactly from head trauma. What? It was from an internal source. Shota thinned his eyes. Like a villain's quirk? We don't know. Tsukachi tried to ask him when he woke up, but he was speaking absolute nonsense, then passed out again. Was only around, 20 minutes. Shota nodded, feeling like he had missed something as he stared at Hizashi. The man was visibly beyond stressed, and that only made Shota more suspicious. It dawned on him faster than he could process. The phantom smack on his ass spiking. What about the other kids? Hizashi didn't respond. I'm not fucking around, Yamada. Tell me right now. At the use of his family name, Hizashi chuckled nervously and stood. I think I'm gonna get you some more water. You're probably thirsty. So fucking help me. Not caring if he's scaring his husband at this point. Tell me, now. Hizashi bit his bottom lip and sniffled heavily. Sho, you need a rest. Unfortunately for the blonde, Shota's legs were still functioning. A black-haired man rocketed up, stumbling several times as he made a break for the door, slamming his shoulder against the curve of the wall on his way out. Hizashi screamed his name as Shota shouldered the taller man to the side, bursting out into the hallway barefoot, sprinting like it was some sort of prison break. Excuse me, he choked out as he reached the nearest receptionist. I'm looking for 3 kids. Well, 1 young adult, blonde girl, and a green-haired boy, and a white-haired man. Do you know who I'm talking about? The woman's eyes were wide as they flicked around, clearly trying to look for help as she smiled uncomfortably. Sir, I think you should go lay down. Shota! Hizashi hissed. Stop! No! Shota cried, slamming his cast down on the desk and jolting his arm, causing him to swear. Let me see my kids! Sho! Eraser, please. This is unprofessional. Shota turned around to see Tsukachi approaching. His hand slacked in his pocket as a lanky blonde followed close, his gaunt face seeming more horrified than usual. Don't tell me what is and isn't professional, Shota sneered. Tell me where my kids are. The only students remaining in the hospital are Shinso, Todoroki, and Kirishima. Their room numbers... No, my other kids, Shota said quietly. This whole secretive behavior is unprofessional if we want to point fingers. I'm the leader on this case, and I have a right to know. Not anymore, Tsukachi said gently. I believe the case is too personal for you to continue working on. No. And I thank you for your hard work you put in. Tsukachi! But I'm officially removing you from the triplet vigilante case. I'm sorry. Shota stared at the detective with disbelief etched into his face. Anger, he hasn't felt in quite some time, began to bubble up. I'm going to ask you again. Shota exhaled slowly and kept his eyes closed. Where are the kids? My kids. Where the fuck are my kids, Tsukachi? The hallway was deathly silent, and Shota kept his eyes closed, very aware of his breathing accelerating and his hand beginning to shake. Tsukachi sighed. I'm sorry, Aizawa. Only members of the case are privy. Tsukachi never got to finish the sentence as Yagi gasped loudly as Hizashi scrambled back in shock, hands reaching out to snatch whatever he could to restrain properly, because Shota Aizawa just punched the shit out of the top-tier detective and most definitely broke his nose. Dabi wrapped his arms around his knees and pulled them tighter to his chest, seated against the wall in the hospital bed, while still fighting for even breaths. Ever so often, Dabi would pluck out a staple from his skin and tossed it into the trash bin that was still filling up with Toga's vomit. Speaking of, Toga hasn't stopped crying as she was still slumped on the floor next to the door, pounding her fists against weakly as the tears continued to flow. Her ankles were still bent at an odd angle from a nasty sprain, and her makeup was still smeared down her cheeks, as she refused to wash her face. her hair matted and messy. Although Dobby wasn't about to admit it to Toga and to stress her out further, he had also slowly spiraling ever since they'd been tossed in here, and in the anxiety of it all, and he ripped open the fresh second-degree burn he gave himself. His borrowed black shirt secretly soaked in blood, but he couldn't find the energy within himself to change. Please, Toga hiccuped in a painful tone, her cheeks pressed against the metal of the door. The banging of her fists is the only sound in the quiet room. Toga drew in a breath, and Dobby covered his ears as Toga let out a fourth blood-curdling scream within this hour, not stopping until her face was flushed red from lack of oxygen, causing her to sob harder. All Dobby could hear was himself crying as a child at night, curled in on himself after training with his father. It was now causing panic to grow. Please, Toga, he whispered quietly, picking up his head weakly as the girl looked back in his direction, watching him in deep bags under her eyes. Come here. Toga stared at him for several moments in silence. Dobby simply maintained eye contact as he waited patiently. She sighed quietly and sniffled, pulling herself up by the locked door and limping over, hesitantly at the edge of the bed. Dobby shifted over, providing her enough room, holding out one hand as she struggled to lift herself up with her injured ankle. Once she was settled, Dobby exhaled slowly and pulled her under one arm, hoping she wouldn't question the dry blood on his sleeve. She didn't. While Toga flinched slightly at first, she eventually gave in and leaned into the touch, resting her head against Dobby's shoulder. The two really needed a shower, although that went unspoken. I don't even care about getting caught, she whispered after several minutes passed by, letting Dobby attempt unknotting some of the tangles in her hair. None of this even matters anymore. Dobby wasn't positive how to respond, so he hummed and encouraged Toga to keep talking. They just locked us up in here like some sort of animals. Why? What did we do? We were so careful with being vigilantes. I didn't kill anyone. They think we're villains. Are we, Toya? Dobby stared down at his feet and pulled the blanket over the two of them. No, we're not villains. Just different. And if you're different, I want to be different too. That's right. Dobby wasn't sure how much time passed until Toga's sniffles finally came to an end, yet the silent tears continued to fall, staining the blanket down below. I want out, she whispered. I want to see Uzu, and Toshi, and Shota. Why won't they let us? Dobby didn't know how to answer that question once again, and he didn't understand either. Why couldn't they know? Toga squirmed out of Dobby's hold and slipped back onto the ground, limping towards the door, staring at the doorknob. The room was silent once again until Toga inhaled sharply. It moved. What? Dobby uncurled himself from his position and let his bare feet meet the cold floor, steadily tiptoeing closer to Toga and pulling her back slightly. Sure enough, the doorknob was shaking ever so slightly, until it turned completely, the metal door creaking open as a familiar person stood there holding a key, hands trembling and tears already falling. I made a key, she mumbled in a shaky voice. I tried to take one of the police officers, but he had threatened to arrest me for some reason, so when he went to pee, I molded the keyhole and ran home to make my own. I'm sorry I took so long. I never made a key from a mold before. The girl with pink dreadlocks wrapped one arm around each vigilante as she cried quietly, only falling to her knees as Toga began crying, tears of her own once more. Falling with her, and Dobby fell too, more blood dripping from the corner of his eyes, holding the only two people he could reach. Why did Kaminari send me a message saying Satoshi was in the hospital? May whispered. And why hasn't Izuku responded to any of my messages? He always answers. Always. Toga only shook her head against May's shoulder, and she gripped onto her gray tank top like her life depended on it. It felt like it did, too. Dobby as well. For the first time in forever, Dobby missed the feeling of his own tears. Oh, it's so sad. Jesus Christ. Uh, this is a different type of angst, man. I swear, it really is. It's completely different. It's not your normal, break your heart angst and like just give you back a broken heart. No, this is like the slowly like just keep picking at your heart until it's like crumbles. It's like, damn, my poor heart, give it back, at least one piece. But one of the things that I do love so much is the relationship between Aizawa and Mike. Like, Aizawa is practically saying, Zashi, you are the love of my life, but don't you dare beat yourself up. Like, that's so wholesome. I love it. And also, Tsukachi deserved that broken nose that he got from Aizawa. Like, I'm surprised that he only got a broken nose. Like, I would have gave him worse, but it's not real, but it feels real. So, if you want to see more of this, you know what to do.